千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. Let's get right back to continue our discussion of chapter 45. What did we talk about last time? Well, we started by exploring the chapter itself. All 10 lines we divided up in a sectional analysis. And this is the result. Last time, we divided the chapter up into 3 sections, a beginning, a middle, and an end, or introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. So as I mentioned previously, this is a very concept-heavy chapter. You're going to see in this chapter 5 major concepts: the great perfection, great fullness, great straightness, great skill, and great eloquence. These are all important to the Tao, but they have never gotten much attention in the West. The concepts we're more familiar with in the West would be concepts like Wu Wei and Pu, the principle of simplicity. Those are really the concepts that the original Western pioneers, the original students from the 60s understood, and they taught what they knew. So those concepts became popular, but they had trouble with, they had great trouble with the concept of the 5 greats, and therefore none of that was adequately covered or transmitted to other people. That's okay. We're going to remedy that today. Previous generations of Western students did not have a firm concept on the 5 greats. They skipped over them. They talked only about what they could understand, and we're going to get into them in great detail today. So previously, the first concept that we discussed was the concept of the great perfection. The great perfection is synonymous with the Tao. It's a reference to the Tao. And we can sometimes witness the great perfection of the Tao or glimpse a hint of it when we observe the world. When we, for instance, look up to the sky, or when we study the universe. Furthermore, we can also see great perfection of the Tao in terms of human attainment. So the examples that we used last time include what you see here: the gymnast, the ballet dancer, the virtuoso pianist. Generally speaking, in every area of endeavor, human beings have always aimed for the state of perfection, and sometimes we attain it. Now, these examples that you see in front of you, these are physical activities, but because we are discussing the Tao, we must also touch on perfection in terms of spiritual attainment, and we will. Now, as I said, the concept of great perfection and the statements that Lao Tzu made can be rather difficult to understand. It's certainly difficult to understand for students who get into it without the proper guidance. Now, we can make it a lot clearer when we lay it out with this table that you saw last time. On the left-hand side, you saw the different levels that applies, the universal level of the Tao of humanity, and then the Tao of the self. We always have to come back to that. We always have to come back to cultivation. So what Lao Tzu said about the great perfection was that it seemed flawed or incomplete. And after we went through a very lengthy explanation last time, we now understand that when we see the Tao as flawed or incomplete, it's due to the flawed or incomplete understanding or human perception. When we look deeper, we definitely see that the Tao functions without failure, and that's the right-hand column. And the understanding, the complete understanding of this concept lies in the ability, your ability, to be able to apply those ideas at the various levels of Tao manifestation. Now, the great perfection was not the only thing that we talked about. This whole theme about perception of the Tao, the incomplete human understanding, is a theme that carries throughout the rest of this chapter. So that's the key. I'd like to ask you to keep that in mind. Human perception, imperfect, incomplete, lacking, there's something missing, and you're going to see that over and over again. So after the great perfection, the next concept we talked about last time was the great fullness. Now, you can see here that this whole idea of flawed or incomplete human understanding carries over to help you comprehend this is simply another way to look at the Tao. So ultimately, a Tao discussion comes back to the self, as I mentioned. So at the very bottom, you're going to see the self. In this case, it has everything to do with being empty. That's the middle column there. And to be empty in this context is to be humble. Is to be humble in the heart, to have room in your mind to fill it with new knowledge, new learning, to practice the Tao, to fill your life with joy. And that's the right-hand side. So for details on these discussions, I would refer you to the recording of our previous session together. The most important thing definitely is the emptiness of the self-concept. That is the humility, the practice of the humble cultivator. So that's something that many sages have emphasized in different ways, not just in the Daodejing, but also in other sutras and classics. So last time, we talked about Mengzi. Mengzi is another sage who came after Lao Tzu. And he studied under Confucius, and he was an accomplished sage in his own right. Like Confucius, he studied the Tao. There's no real distinct separation between Confucianism and the Tao. What we see in the West about the two schools of thought being at odds with one another, that's really more of a latter-day invention. Back in the days of the great sages, they just knew that they were studying the Tao. So, speaking of Mengzi, what he pointed out was that just like our understanding of the universe or the Tao is incomplete, in cultivation, we must also assume that we are imperfect, so that our practice of the Tao may very well be lacking in some way. So we may not be aware of where we are missing key pieces of our cultivational practice. So the expression that Mengzi provided in his writing, I have translated, as you can see here. So what he said was that if you are loving to people, but they do not get close to you, reflect on your benevolent compassion. So that's the first line that you see there in the Chinese writing. 爱人不亲，反其人. That's the first line. So the idea is simple. If I express love and caring for other people, but they do not return in kind, they do not return the same love and caring to me, then the fault, the blame is not with them. Rather, I need to take a closer look at myself. Do I really care for other people? Is that what I'm really expressing to them? Or am I in reality out, for instance, seeking attention for myself? If so, that would actually be an egocentric practice. It would be inauthentic, it would be insincere. And of course, people would react in negative fashion. It's the same with the other two lines. If I try to lead people, but they do not respond by following my lead, well, the blame is not necessarily with them. I have to take another look at myself. I have to examine, well, what is the wisdom that I'm offering to them? What is the wisdom of the leadership that I'm offering? If they do not see my leadership as wise, then of course they will not follow. So it's a very humble, self-reflecting attitude, assuming that one is not perfect. And the last one is that what if I'm giving people respect and courtesy, if I'm courteous to them, but they are not courteous to me, if they are rude in response, well, then I have to take a look at the sincerity of my respect. Do they see that I'm expressing like a phony courtesy to them, so they become offended? Well, that's possible. So this brings us to the end of the recap from last time. The last concept that we got into went to great straightness. This is the third point of greatness after the two that we covered. It is the first in a group of three. So total, there are five. The original lines from the Daodejing, lines 5, 6, and 7, those are the three. And you can see in the translation there, great straightness, great skill, great eloquence. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time today on making sure that everybody has crystal clarity on these concepts. We started talking about 大直 great straightness. And this is the slide that I showed you before. I would actually like to expand on this a bit. This is our inability to really comprehend the Tao, leading to mistakes and distortions in daily practice. So the example here starts with looking at roads. In the real world, we know the shortest distance between two cities is a road, but the road is not a straight line. That will be the shortest distance in mathematics, but in the real world, it doesn't necessarily apply. There's mountains and hills between two cities, there's rivers and streams, and so there's all kinds of terrain. So the road that travels from one to the other has to wind its way through the different kinds of terrain. Now, once the road has been constructed, it becomes the most direct route. It's the best path. But we know from experience, traveling around the country, it's got curves. It's not straight. So it being the most direct route, the most time-saving and convenient route, it is the Tao. That is great straightness. Not literally great, like a mathematically straight line, but it's the best route. Now, of course, from our conception, we think that the curves are inefficient. So looking at this picture that you see on the right-hand side, you can imagine people wanting to, well, why don't I just, cut across? So I'm expanding on that with this other image here. As you can see, a curving road through a mountain, and it has to curve that way, we know, because there's a very steep grade. You have to go back and forth. So to make your travel safer, that road is constructed according to the shape of the terrain. It is meant to keep us safe and allow for efficient travel. It's the best path. The purpose for this path is to get you from one point to another in the best possible way. When I say best, I think you know what I mean. I mean the easiest, safest, actually the fastest, the path that saves you the most time. But then, just imagine, in this example, that there's someone trying to clever who looks at this. Maybe this person is at the top of this topography, looking down, seeing how the road is winding this way and that, as you can see in this photo. And that person is thinking, what I can do better than to curve back and forth like that. I can be much more efficient. And imagine this person thinking, well, obviously the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line. So then imagine that he drives off the road straight down. Here's that person in his car, little red car there. And imagine that he's thinking, I can take the shortcut. I don't need to go back and forth following the road. I can be much faster, save myself time by cutting through. That's the shortcut. Now, of course, you know what's going to happen. As he goes off the road, driving his car straight down, the grade is too steep. Suppose the car tips over, or it encounters perhaps an obstacle that it cannot cross. If it tips over, it gets damaged, perhaps beyond repair, like badly damaged, maybe rolling its way down, perhaps causing the driver severe injury, grave injury, or perhaps even killing the driver. That's possible. So you know and I know that this would not be a good way to go. And this is used as an example to depict what happens in daily cultivation. And I'm going to be really specific about that. I'm going to draw some examples. I think some of those may be a little surprising. Now, this is a modern example with road construction, as you can see. What about in ancient times? What about in ancient times where there's no roads with that are paved, that allow for travel by cars? Well, it's actually much the same. In ancient times, the path through the mountain might be shaped by foot traffic over many years rather than construction, as you can imagine. And if you've done hiking around the countryside, you know exactly what I mean. Some of the paths through a forest are just, basically made by foot traffic. So when that is the case, it is similar as the road that was constructed, in that the path would still have to follow the terrain. It would still wind back and forth depending on the dictates of the terrain. And in the same way, someone trying to be clever, standing on a path, maybe a hiking trail, maybe standing at a point of elevation, looking down, looking at all these curves, winding back and forth. Perhaps this person trying to be clever is thinking, feeling confident that, yeah, I can cut through. I can cut through the forest, and I can connect with the trail on the other end. Perhaps I will save myself a lot of time. Now, you can imagine that this is chancy, this is dicey, this can be dangerous, because as this person strikes out, leaving the trail, leaving the well-marked, well-traveled trail into the forest, what can happen? Well, you know, the going can get tough. This person may encounter natural obstacles at every turn. You know, what looks like there may be a path looking from the top down, when you actually get into the forest, it's not that easy. There are no obvious markers anywhere. And looking back, the trees block the path from view, maybe a pretty dense growth, so you don't have that visibility. At some point, you may become disoriented. You may slip. You may fall down, suffer scrapes and bruises. And worst of all, you may find yourself disoriented and lost. Like, which way did I come from? Which way am I going? And there are times when you can travel in a great circle and not realize it. So the shortcut turns into a big waste of time. You suffer negative consequences. You may have to come back, find your way back to the marked trail, and then follow that after wasting quite a bit of time. So both the ancient example of the hiking trail and the modern example of the constructed road basically lead to the same conclusion. It's the same pattern. This is the idea that the ancient sages had to apply this real world concept to Tao cultivation. So imagine that Tao cultivation looks like this. Imagine that just like the road had been constructed following the terrain, or a footpath, a hiking trail being marked by years of foot traffic, a path of cultivation has been pointed out by the ancients for specific reasons. So we're applying the same ideas to Tao cultivation. It follows the terrain of human nature, so it appears to curve back and forth, similar to the hiking trail or the mountain road. Now, this is the great straightness, because despite curving back and forth, it's still the best path. It's still easy to walk. It may be broad and plain. It may be something that you can travel with a relaxed state of mind. It's the best possible way. It'll get you from point A to point B in the most direct and efficient way. It's the best way. It's the easiest, the safest, and actually fastest. Of course, just like the person trying to be clever on the hiking trail, the car driver trying to be clever on the mountain road, there's gonna be people trying to be clever who want to take the side paths, cut across, take the shortcut. And the idea is similar. Well, I can go directly from here to there. I'm gonna save myself a lot of time and effort. And just like the previous examples, it's probably not gonna work out. In all likelihood, they end up wasting time. They may even suffer misfortune, maybe accidents, maybe injuries. At best, they would just be spending a lot more time than they otherwise need to. So this is what Lao Tzu talks about repeatedly in the Daodejing, about people liking the side paths, so they veer off the Tao, even though the Tao is easy to travel. Now, when I bring this up when I bring this up previously, invariably people will ask, can you give some examples of taking shortcuts? So the overall idea is that the Tao is the quote-unquote the great straightness. It's the most direct path. And then people look at that and say, well, no, I can do better. Well, they actually can't. They take the shortcuts. What does that mean, though, in concrete terms, in real-life examples? So the question is, Derek, can you give some examples of that? And I would say yes. So here, I'm gonna divide it up into two parts. There's gonna be the authentic Tao on the left-hand side. These are things that come from ancient times, come from the Eastern traditions. These are authentic. These are real. These are time-proven. Shortcuts, these are the shortcuts that people have always tried to do, East and West. So this is not uniquely a Western manifestation. Throughout history of Tao cultivation, thousands of years, people have always tried to save themselves time and effort by taking the shortcuts. So let me explain. Let me go through them one by one. I think you will see exactly what I mean. The authentic Tao goes like this. 自律, which means to regulate the self. The meaning of that is that nature has natural laws. Therefore, Tao cultivators themselves, they also have to emulate nature by establishing and adhering to an internal code of honor. It's the natural laws for the self. It's what your character and integrity will tolerate or will not tolerate. It's how you discipline yourself to stay on a path of conscience that you know you ought to stay on. That's the Tao. That's been the way it is for thousands of years. What are shortcuts? Well, this we do see in the West in a rather prevalent way. It's not new, like I said, it's been around in Eastern culture as well. And that's because human nature is the same, East or West. So it sounds good on the surface. And it goes like this. We should let go of rules. Why? Because we should follow our own nature rather than the artificial constraints of arbitrary rules. When this is brought up by Tao teachers, there's oftentimes a lot of nodding heads. Yeah, why should we bow down to these arbitrary rules that limit us? Why should we not just do whatever we want? Okay, that's fine. It's less of an effort than, establishing and adhering an internal code of honor. Less work. But it doesn't get you any further on the Tao, on the path of cultivation. And if you want to do that, at some point, if you want to attain spiritual awakening, you eventually have to come back to the Tao. You eventually have to have that internal discipline to have your own code of honor, your own standards. So on the right-hand side, sounds good, but not the Tao. On the left-hand side, here's another one. 经典, which means classics. Tao classics specifically were written to be a concise guide to life. So we should try to understand their meaning as much as possible. What were the ancients trying to say? And that's what we're doing together. You and I getting together once a week, delving deeply into the classics to understand exactly what the ancients were trying to say. And in every line, every character, there's rich history that I have attempted to illustrate to bring the meaning to life. Now, you guys are actually the rare exceptions. There's more people than are gathered here today who believe actually not that we should try to understand the meaning of ancient classics as much as possible. That may be a little surprising because of the way you think about the ancient classics, but I find it rather commonplace. It looks like this. The ancient texts are intentionally vague, so their meaning can be what we want them to be. So right off the bat, I would say, no, they're not intentionally vague. They were actually written to make sense, to be clear. Now, because of time, because of the evolution of language, we may not find them as easy to understand today. The same way that if you study the plays of Shakespeare, some of those expressions going back hundreds of years are not easy to understand with modern sensibilities. Same with the Tao classics. But when they were written to be clear. So it's not true that they're intentionally vague. That's mostly an idea given by people who themselves cannot understand the original, and this is used as an excuse for the lack of understanding. So it's a shortcut. It's a lot less effort. It seems like it would save a lot of time to not worry about what the ancients were trying to say. But because when you interpret willy-nilly to whatever happens to catch your fancy, you're not actually getting the Tao. You're doing something that doesn't advance you, that doesn't help you go forward. So you eventually have to come back to the Tao. Next, show Tao. This is familiar to all of us. Tao cultivation means putting in the work to study and apply the Tao in every aspect of life. I talk about this all the time, and I know that the people who decide to listen to me usually can agree with this, and that's why they decide to listen to me. It is, however, by no means the standard that is out there, in that many people actually believe something different. They are actually looking for shortcuts, quick solutions. So there's something, I'm going to pick the most egregious example. You may not have come across this, but this is chosen from real life. This is an actual group of people who believe in the following. The master, not really a master, but they call him the master. The master will create a dharmic wheel implanted in you. That dharmic wheel will spin 24/7. When it spins, it's adding to your merits, your spiritual merits. It's doing the cultivational work for you, so you don't have to work so hard. There are endless variations of this. Like when you become initiated into our tradition, you automatically advance your spiritual understanding beyond that of most people, and you are only a few steps away from true enlightenment. Okay, well, again, not true. These are traps for the unwary. It's a shortcut. It appears like it would be a lot less work, so it appeals to people. Wu Wei, take actions without attachments. It's all about the journey, not the destination. So focus on the process, not the end result. When you take actions without attachments, sometimes you realize that very little action is actually required. Then Wu Wei turns into unattached actions into minimal actions. There are also times when observing the situation without attachments, you realize that I don't actually need to do much, or indeed, I don't have to do anything. I can let the situation evolve on its own. In that particular instance, unattached action can transform into no actions, but it is definitely not the case every time. The shortcut is to take the no action part as the whole explanation, so that Wu Wei, rather than unattached action, becomes do nothing. Just relax. Let the universe take care of everything for you. It's bad advice. It's bad advice in life. It can lead to all kinds of unforeseen, suboptimal consequences in your life, and yet it is peddled as some kind of wisdom. The truth is much more nuanced, much deeper on the left-hand side, that there are cases when you should do nothing, there are cases when you should do little, there are cases when you should do the appropriate amount. In all cases, you don't want to overdo anything. That's what it really is. And then lastly, here's an expression that comes from the Tao, 顺其自然. not from the Daodejing, but from the practice of Tao cultivation. It basically says, follow the nature of all things. So 顺其自然, the first character, 顺, is to follow. 其 is the possessive, like it's or there. 自然, the last two characters, means nature or natural, that which is natural. So to follow the nature of all things, again, this is deeper and more nuanced than what it has turned into. And what it has turned into is go with the flow. I think this is going to be surprising to a lot of people, because when many people talk about the Tao, naturally they think go with the flow is part of it. So when I say go with the flow is actually different from the authentic Tao being 顺其自然, they may find this quite surprising. And therefore, I want to go deeper into this expression. Now, again, go with the flow is something that seems like it would take a lot less time and effort than follow the nature of all things. And I will explain why that is. Okay, so 顺其自然, let's get into it. I've isolated the expression. You see this at the top of the slide. And I want to, as usual, I want to present the pinyin romanization for that. So it doesn't quite depict the way it sounds. It's as close as the pinyin system can manage. So the actual pronunciation is 顺其自然. And the pinyin, probably you will look at it and say 顺其自然. Okay, so that's okay. Well, let's just say that's close enough for now. Okay, so 顺其自然. What does that mean? Let's break it down character by character. The last two characters, 自然, those are compound characters. Together, they mean nature or natural. And then the first one, as I mentioned, means follow. The second character means it's a possessive, which can also be plural, like there. So the meaning of that, when you string them all together, when you string the characters together, is to follow the nature of all things. So in summary, this is about moving along the same direction as the nature of something or someone. It could be, for instance, the nature of an event, and you're going along the same direction as the nature of the event, or you could say that you are following along the same direction as the nature of someone. So if that person is going off in a particular direction that you want to work with what that direction is, it may not be the ideal direction that you want, but by working with it, you can influence that direction toward the direction that you want. So going along the nature rather than going against the grain. The reason being, going against the grain will result in contention, friction, conflicts. At the end of this chapter, there's the last three lines can be used for managing that, for resolving that. We'll get to that in a moment. For now, let me point this out. 顺其自然 is different from go with the flow because you still must make adjustments to match the pace of whatever it is that you are moving along with, whether it's an event or a person. This can best be seen in this graphic that I have for you here. This is a rafter in the rapids. Now, of course, the rafter is following the nature of the rapids. The rafter is working hard to make sure he is moving along the way he wants, but he's working with the powerful currents. He doesn't want to just be pushed in any direction by the powerful currents, he has a particular direction in mind. So this is along the same direction as the nature of things, not against the grain, not attempting to travel upstream, basically impossible. Going with the flow, but working with the flow to make adjustments, and therefore not usually what we mean when we say go with the flow. Go with the flow would be simply propelled by the powerful currents without doing much. Now, a different expression, 随波逐流, is closer to go with the flow in Chinese. But that expression has a negative connotation. It's like following a fad blindly, jumping on the bandwagon, doing what everybody else is doing, you know. Being pushed, the mental imagery of this expression is to be pushed by the waves. Now, for this reason, I want to be very clear with everyone. Go with the flow, not a Tao principle. Go along the nature of the flow and work with it. That would be much closer to what the ancient sages were saying. So what does that mean exactly? To go with the nature of things, to work with it? Well, there is another expression that illustrates what that means. You have to realize that the mindset behind this expression is proactive. And it can be described as the following. 尽人事，听天命, an expression of 6 characters. What does that mean? Let me translate for you. 尽人事，听天命 can be translated as first, do all that is humanly possible. Then listen to the heavenly mandate. So the idea, I think, is simple to grasp. I describe it this way. Life in this perspective is a collaboration between your initiative, like I said, is proactive, and your destiny. So the very first thing that you have to do is to do what you can. So for instance, there's an exam coming up. You want to do your best to prepare for that. You study for the exam. Once you have done everything you can, you set up a plan, a study plan. You take the time to study as much as possible. Then, 听天命, you let the chips fall where they may. You take the exam, you're completely relaxed because you've already done everything you can. And that's what leads to the real relaxation of the Tao. It's not to deny that everything's going to work out fine, you don't have to do anything. When people take that on as a shortcut, they actually feel a deep anxiety, which they continuously try to gloss over and ignore. No, I'm relaxed. I don't have to do anything. Everything's going to work out fine. No, that's okay. I don't need to study. I'm just going to go with the flow. That would not be the Tao. The Tao is what you see here. 尽人事，听天命. Okay, now, I want to focus on the compound characters here, the 2 characters forming nature or natural, 自然. There's any number of people, East and West, who will use that as the excuse for anything. So if they're doing something that's not very Tao-like, they may say, I'm just following my nature. I'm just being me. I'm just being natural. This is how I am naturally. Now, the actual authentic Tao tradition would not deny that it's natural, but would instead point out that there are different parts to being natural. Like the yin and yang symbol that are complementary to one another, there is the natural that leads in a positive direction. There's also the natural that leads in a negative direction, like yin and yang. Can't have one without the other. So the expression on the left-hand side, 自然成长, I'll explain what that means in just a moment. The expression on the right-hand side, 自然淘汰. So the first two characters you can tell are the same. The difference will be the third and fourth characters. So let me explain what they are. 自然成长 means to grow naturally, the natural growth and development. It means in Tao cultivation, you follow your natural instinct, your natural direction, your natural preference to maximize yourself, to maximize your life, to move toward the best version that you can be. That's natural. That exists in everybody. Just the fact that you are listening to me means that you too are maximizing yourself. You're looking at that part of yourself and you are emphasizing that natural part. That's great. How about 自然淘汰 on the right-hand side? It means to be naturally eliminated. Like in the evolutionary context, survival of the fittest. Well, if you are not fit, if you are not competitive, you are eliminated. So 自然淘汰, what it means is that from the Tao perspective, you follow the natural desire to take it easy and remain inactive. Is that natural? Well, of course it is. We all have this natural inertia. We all have this desire to sometimes just not do a whole lot. Just rest. Take it easy, like I said. So what can happen is that when you choose the path of the natural growth, that is what cultivation is about. The movement toward the best version of yourself leads to development of your spiritual self, and that in turn brings a natural happiness. You're going to be full of joy because you know that you are doing everything you can to maximize, optimize your life, your destiny. So how great is that? I think it's wonderful. Now, the other side of the coin, the complements of that, 自然淘汰. Well, we can't deny that we live in a world that is naturally competitive by default. That's just the way it is. In our world, that's just the way it is, no matter where we look. Because of that, if you are not moving forward, you are naturally moving backward. You are naturally allowing your inertia to let you be eliminated. But again, that's natural too. So if growth is natural, elimination is natural, both are included in the greater nature, that is the Tao, then you can see the choice is really up to you. You can choose the left-hand side, 自然成长, and this is symbolized by the thriving lotus flower, emerging out of mud, growing beautifully. 自然淘汰, the right-hand side, will be symbolized by withering flowers. The withering flowers are no less a natural part of reality than the left-hand side. So it all comes right down to what you choose for yourself. Use nature, take advantage of it, maximize the capabilities that you have, take advantage of this opportunity to listen to the Tao, or become inactive and eventually 自然淘汰. So this is the important thing that I want to convey. This is about the great straightness. So that was a discussion on the great straightness. And let me also say that in this particular discussion of the Daodejing, I will be using a lot of Chinese expressions because, like I mentioned, this is a very concept-heavy chapter. It's not difficult to understand if you know the cultural expressions that pertain to it. It can be rather difficult to understand if you have no access to that. So I want to explain all those different expressions for everyone as they come up. Let's continue. We've done the great straightness. Now let's talk about great skill. Great skill seems unrefined. Let's talk about what that means. So first of all, this line is connected to the first line in the context of human mastery. Now remember, when we talk about mastery, we can be talking about a particular skill to master, like a physical skill. The examples that I used before, gymnastics, ballet, piano, etc. But this is a Tao discussion. So it always has to come back to Tao cultivation. Human mastery when it comes to the Tao has to do with mastery of the mind and the spirit. It has to do with other aspects as well, mastery of physical health, etc. Now, regardless of which aspect of life we're talking about, mastery follows predictable stages. Skill in this context, whether it's about music or art, athletics, communication, or Tao cultivation, it really covers skills in every area of human endeavor. So oftentimes, I would describe Tao cultivation as the skill of living life. Sometimes I say it's the art of living. So these are just different ways to convey the same thing. When we learn a particular skill or to master an art, regardless of what it is, we all begin as a novice. So as a novice, we're ignorant. We don't have any techniques or skills. We have a natural lack of that. All we have are the natural instincts. That is stage one. Stage two is the level of technical competence. That's when we're taught a particular skill. It may be a drill that we have to repeat time and time again. It may be a certain set of moves that we have to continue to practice every day for hours every day. In Tao cultivation, it'll be the practice of reflection, study, application, etc. So we practice the technical skills in order to become more technically competent. At a certain point in time, we get so good at this that we've completely mastered and integrated the techniques. And again, this can be a physical skill, but it could also be Tao cultivation. This is the time when the techniques become second nature. You utilize the techniques and the skills without thinking. And so there's a little bit more. Let's go further. When you are at that third level where it's just you, the techniques are completely integrated, you can forget about them. You can just focus on self-expression. You can forget about them because they are who you are. You cannot be without those skills or techniques. They are a part of you. That is when, as you are expressing yourself, other people will look upon you and say, wow, you make it look so easy. You make it look so effortless. It seems unrefined because there is a naturalness, much like level 1. Superficially, it looks similar, but actually, it's the greatest skill of all. And when people compliment you in that way, you make it look so easy. That is when you know you have attained true mastery. So if you want to become virtuous, in the beginning, you remind yourself to be virtuous. After a while, the virtue is second nature. You've become a virtuous person. You don't have to think about it anymore. You just have to be yourself. At that point, other people will say, this virtue is difficult for me to put into practice, but you make it look so easy. So I want to focus more on the cultivation of the mind as it is related to Tao cultivation. Thus, in speaking about great skill, I have a slide again devoted to the two sides. The left-hand side, the ignorant mind, that's what we all start out with when we're the novice. On the right-hand side, the skillful mind, that's when we gain mastery, maybe even become the master for that particular refinement of the mind. So on the left-hand side, let's start with one characteristic of the ignorant mind, the novice. Gullible, credulous, easily taken in by false claims. The skillful mind regard everything with balanced skepticism. So I want to invite everyone to think about the process between the two. As you train your mind to become less gullible, less credulous, less easily taken in by false claims, you may be constantly reminding yourself to be skeptical, and you can easily overdo this. You can become hardened, you can become cynical, you can basically disbelieve everything. But when you master this particular skill, though, it becomes natural, and you have this, what I call balanced skepticism, which means that you are not absolutely believing in everything, but you are also not cynical. And therefore, when you encounter something new, there's a claim that's being made, you would evaluate that. You would think, interesting, this deserves to be looked into more deeply without necessarily dismissing it outright or embracing it outright. So that's the balanced skepticism. The ignorant mind is also characterized by no particular curiosity to learn anything new. So this is where a teacher can play a great role in inspiring interest, in sparking that desire to learn. The skillful mind has gotten to a point where it is fascinated by learning, fascinated by new ideas that can be applied in a practical way. Thus, the skillful mind is the mind of a lifelong learner. To continue, often put the blame on others or unjust fate. The ignorant mind tends to point to others or to fate itself for blame, whereas the skillful mind see themselves as ultimately responsible. That is, they are the ones with the power to make changes, to make adjustments. So all of these follow the same pattern that we talked about. In the second one, you may start out with just a rigorous program of learning, but then something catches your interest, you expand on that, you get into a whole new world, so that by the time you attain mastery, it has become who you are, that you are naturally curious, you're naturally willing and fascinated to learn. Same with the third bullet point there. You may start out ignorant, not knowing any better, pointing the blame to other people, but there's a process that you go through where you constantly remind yourself that it isn't other people that are to blame. You really have the power to take responsibility and make changes in your life. After a while, that's been integrated into your being completely. So that is how you think by default. You don't need to remind yourself anymore. So same process, same pattern. The ignorant mind tends to lash out in anger, in frustration. Why? Because the blame is being put on other people. You feel powerless. You feel helpless. Why me, quote unquote, is the familiar expression. Whereas after cultivation, the skillful mind understands the way to transform emotions into motivation. Just because you are cultivating yourself, that doesn't mean you do not encounter setbacks. Setbacks are a natural part of life. The skillful mind, though, will not find setbacks to be frustrating, to be a cause of anger. Whatever feeling of discomfort, whatever feeling of mental upset, the skillful mind is able to turn that into positive energy to propel you into solving that problem for yourself. Lastly, the ignorant mind tends to have this feeling of entitlement, that other people should do what they can to help me. If they don't, then I'm frustrated. The skillful mind gets to the point where they feel entitled to nothing, and therefore they have no expectations. Whatever they get, they have gratitude. They're grateful for everything. So this is mastery. And as you look at this list, the difference between the ignorant mind and the skillful mind, I hope that you will look for some areas where you can perhaps realize that you need some additional work and that you can put it into practice for yourself so that the skill or virtue will become second nature for you as well. When that happens, you can forget about the practice and just be yourself. And you're going to hear other people say you make it look natural, easy, or effortless. That's when you know you have attained true mastery. Moving on, let's talk about the next point of greatness. This is great eloquence. The second character, so the first character, da, that just means big or great or large or vast, great, grand, etc. Second character, bian, that's usually, in modern Mandarin, that's usually used for debates. But this is not great debates. This is the ancient meaning great eloquence, eloquence of expression. So the greatest debater of all would be one who doesn't debate at all. It's the level of the great eloquence. Now, the popular misconception. So the idea from the Tao is contrary to the popular conception. Popular conception being that someone who talks in rapid-fire fashion must be a strong debater, must be a great speaker, a powerful communicator, etc. In the Tao conception, such a person is most likely ego-driven, and that's why they talk so much. They are likely to always be talking too much while doing too little, more words than actions. The Tao itself is the opposite of that. The Tao itself talks not at all well. It does absolutely everything. Therefore, Tao cultivators are the opposite of the conventional idea of the great talkers. Tao cultivators talk less while doing more. And therefore, people may see them as not being very articulate. And they would be sorely mistaken. So let's explore this just a little more. There's a few more points to make on this. So usually, as I mentioned, when we talk about skillful communicators, people think of lawyers, politicians, salesmen, successful sales professionals. Those are the people who can really talk, they can sell you on anything, etc. The Tao perspective is different. From the Tao, these people do not appear to be great communicators at all. They do not possess true eloquence, which is the topic here, great eloquence. And the reason is because they all talk too much. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the Tao gets results without saying a word. Because of that, great communicator in the Tao is someone who gets the point across without saying anything more than is necessary. So this is an idea that's repeated several times in the Daodejing. It is also something that is weaved into Eastern culture. So you have heroes in Eastern culture who are stoic, who don't talk that much, but who are doers. It's a very old idea, and let me explain exactly how old. So the great eloquence. The top two characters that you see here, Jing, what people mistakenly pronounce as Ching or Ching sometimes. The concept of great eloquence predated the Daodejing by thousands of years. It first appeared in the Jing. There's a specific expression in the Jing for that. 及人之辞寡，造人之辞多. What does that mean? Let me translate it for you. 及人, so by this point, you may get pretty good at recognizing the second character here as the character for person or people. The first character, 及, means auspicious. So the two together, 及人, means the auspicious person. 之, the third character there, is the apostrophe S that you see here. 词, the fourth character there, will be words. And then the last character there, 寡, means bereft, which in this case means very little or not a whole lot. So when you put it together, the auspicious person's words are few. Now, 及人, the auspicious person, has broader meaning. It means someone who is cultivated, someone who is trusted, someone who is virtuous, and therefore auspicious. Then, 造人, that's the impetuous person. The impetuous person is the one who is impulsive, who lacks self-control, who invites problems and troubles. That person's words are many. So imagine that with the I Ching, we have ancient text that goes back at least 4,800 years, usually I round it up and say 5,000. And yet, we have an expression from that long ago that was the ancient equivalent to our modern expression today in English, loose lips sink ships. So why is that? Well, again, because the Tao is all about human nature. So in ancient China, as it was everywhere else, ancient Europe, ancient everywhere else, you name it, it's true, it was true. It was true that talking too much caused problems, invited trouble. Conversely, those who valued and measured their words, well, those were the trustworthy ones. Those were the auspicious person. If you have auspicious persons involved in your enterprise, you can trust them to get the job done. You can trust them to do it well. You can trust that they will not betray your confidence. So what I want to do is to have everyone look at this slide, look at the translation. The auspicious person's words are few. The impetuous person's words are many. So think about that, and then think about the people that you know in your life. See how easy it is to validate this ancient saying. It was true back then, thousands of years ago. It's still true today. So let me shift it up a little bit. And I want to link it up. I want to link the great eloquence together with great skill. So great skill seems unrefined. Great eloquence seems inarticulate. These two concepts together form an overall attitude of true, authentic confidence, which is also true, authentic humility. Let's stick with the confidence part for just a moment. Why confident? Why authentically confident, radiating outward from within? Well, it's because when you possess true skill, real skills, real eloquence, you don't need to show off. You don't feel the need to show off to anyone. Because you are not constantly showing off, there's gonna be people who will mistakenly assume that you don't know that much. Well, they have no idea. They don't know how much you actually are aware of their attitudes and who you are as a person, your capabilities, what you're capable of. They just have no idea. Therefore, there is a common expression that incorporates both the great skill and the great eloquence. The two combined together, 大智若愚. What does it mean? Great wisdom seems like foolishness. And this goes back to this whole concept that someone who really knows has no need to prove himself or herself. Other people will mistakenly assume that they must know very little. Therefore, great wisdom seems like foolishness. So we're closing in on the last 3 lines of the Daodejing. And we have discussed of the 5 points of greatness. And we'll come back to that again when we do a summary for today. For now, though, let's focus on the last 3 lines. This is good stuff. Line 8, movement overcomes code. So this is basically, the last 3 lines are patterns that we all experience in cultivating the Tao in the real world. It also applies to personal interactions, such as when conflicts, contention, friction arise. So let's focus on just movement overcomes code, line 8. What it means is that when we go from inactive to active, there's a rise in temperature. We're warming up, right? We're heating up. So when you practice, when you emulate the Tao, when you perfect the virtue, it's a good way to get warmed up for the challenge in everyday living. So it can be framed, warming up can be framed in a positive way, like you see here. Then we have line 9, stillness overcomes heat. Well, that's because it's easy for human beings to overdo things. We can certainly get overheated, especially if we pursue cultivation incorrectly. What do I mean by pursuing incorrectly? Well, if you attempt to gain great eloquence by engaging in more debates, you're actually going in the opposite direction. And you will certainly heat up you will certainly overdo it. You get pretty hot under the collar. You can see that sort of a natural consequence. When that happens, we have to bring ourselves back into balance by cooling down. And the key is Jing, which means stillness, quietness, and tranquility. And this takes us to line 10, which is the last line in chapter 45. 清净为天下正. Clear quietness is the standard of the world. So let's focus on 清净. The pinyin looks like this. And I know people will look at that and say King Jing or Queen Jing. No, it's Qing Jing. So the two characters, the first character is clear, clarity. The second character, Jing, as I mentioned, is quietness, stillness, or tranquility. So two things we're talking about here, clarity, tranquility. It's a central concept in Tao cultivation. They are distinct concepts. The two are distinct concepts that reinforce and affect one another. You must have both to attain the level of the Tao. And when I say attain the level of the Tao, it's similar to when we talk about in Buddhism, when we talk about the Great Awakening or enlightenment. Nirvana is a different thing. We'll talk about that separately. For now, let's focus on great spiritual awakening or great spiritual enlightenment. That's attaining the level of the Tao. Now, I mentioned that Qing Jing, the two concepts, powerfully affect one another, powerfully influence one another. So here's where I get into that in more detail. Qing leads to Jing. Clarity leads to tranquility. How does that work? It works because clarity provides an accurate, insightful assessment of the current situation. It lets you see what's around you, what's in front of you, what's behind you clearly. And not just the surface appearance, but also the internal underlying factors, the hidden agenda, if you will. So clarity is the mental and spiritual clarity that'll provide you with this benefit. With this awareness, you will see the best way to quiet yourself down. And then that awareness may compel you to move to a different location. Like, you may find yourself in a place that is not conducive to tranquility or stillness or quietness. So you move yourself someplace else, away from the chaos. Or you may have mastered the concept so much that you can achieve the same effect by mentally taking a step back, create mental distance between yourself and the source of the chaos or the noise in order to better handle the sensory input. And you can do that no matter where you happen to be. You can do that at any time. This is a useful skill to master because you can't always move away from a given location. So then what about the other way? What about Jing leading to Qing? Yes. So let's think about this for a moment. It's, like I said, similar to the yin and yang symbol. There's interplay and synergy between the two, clarity and tranquility, and it goes in both directions. It's a two-way street. Qing strengthens Jing and vice versa. quieting down your mind brings about greater clarity. We've all experienced this. We've all seen what it's like. Noisy thoughts settle down one by one. When you quiet yourself down within, you can bring the scattered pieces of your mind back to the center of your being. And those of you who have gone through initiation in the Tao tradition, you know that so Shen Guan, when you hold the mystic portal, this will happen. The scattered pieces of your mind will return to the center of your being. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the whole thing together. Clear quietness is the standard of the world. So now we want to talk about the standard of the world. When you wield both Ching, Jing, clarity, quietness, you have the ability to take charge of any situation and guide it back to the Tao. That's actually the reasoning. That's the genesis for the slide about conflict resolution. So this is what the standard of the world means. This is about you bringing order to chaos, you being the peacemaker, you taking everybody back to the standard that will be conducive to harmony, the standard that we should all live under. So a powerful teaching. It applies to numerous situations. The more you practice, the better you get at it. It especially is great for conflict resolution, as I mentioned. Let me take you through. So there are two parts to it. In a conflict, there's always patterns associated with conflict, and then there are stages of resolution. So let's bring it all together. The Tao approach to conflict resolution, and let me say, this is very straightforward. This is by no means as difficult as some of the concepts we have already seen. This is easy to understand. So let's take a look. Starting out with patterns of conflict. So in the line, what we'll do is that we'll match each conflict, each pattern with stages of resolution on the right-hand side. So the first thing that we have is movement overcomes cold. So initially, people are upset, anger heats up. So they are no longer in the inactive state. Temperature is rising. So this is what happens initially. The key thing to realize at this point is that as scary as it can be when explosive situations or flare-ups occur, it is not something that will last. Anything that is explosive, by definition, will be temporary. So let me put that up there. Realize this cannot last. It's just like a storm that has to pass sooner or later. Then let's have the second pattern of conflict. Jing Shen Re. Quietness overcomes heat. Stillness overcomes heat. And what this means is that calmness must prevail. So you have to use calmness to overcome the heat of the moment. Then we get to pattern number 3, which is the last line, 清净为天下正. And this is about clear quietness or clear tranquility, whichever way you prefer, being the standard of the world. And what this means is that you have to begin by setting an example as the one who's clear and tranquil. You have to resolve the conflict as the peacemaker who brings clarity and tranquility. And that's what you establish. You establish the clarity and tranquility on the two powerful principles on the contentious situation to bring everyone back from the ledge. Slowly but surely, when you follow these stages, the sun will emerge from behind the storm clouds. And here I have a graphic for that. So this is the Tao of conflict resolution. This completes our explanation of chapter 45 line by line. Now we don't have time to do the paraphrase today. We'll leave that for next time. For now though, I would like to take you to the summary. So applying the Daodejing chapter 45. This is the summary that I showed you last time, depicting the first 2 points of greatness. 大成, the great perfection. 大盈, the great fullness. This is from before. What about today? Today, we have the remaining 3 points of greatness. Let's go through them. Nice summary for today. Great straightness. Now, I think I might have been a little shocking today when I talked about the shortcuts that people are into. They are sort of a distorted version of the Tao. They think that it will save them time and effort, but in actuality, they're taking a shortcut and they will eventually be wasting time and have to return to the Tao. My challenge then for everyone is to take another look at the Tao concepts that you have seen so far in your own personal journey. See it through that lens to see if you have some ideas that perhaps should be unlearned, some ideas that may be distorted. Then there's great skill. So we went through a slide on the different aspects of mental mastery in Tao cultivation. There are some examples that I want to ask if you can take a look at them and see if it contains skills or virtues that you want to work on for yourself. Lastly, great eloquence. And this is the challenge for you to become the auspicious person. So remember, the word 吉人, auspicious, in that context has broader meaning that covers someone who's very well cultivated, someone who is virtuous, and therefore auspicious in any situation. So aspire to be an auspicious person, and this means speaking less. This means that you have to speak with fewer words, that you have to say more with less. Then the challenge becomes, what can you convey through actions instead of words? Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.